So how do we do that? The first thing, and I think the centerpiece of any solution for living globally responsibly, is that the countries, the wealthy countries of the world, your country and mine, have to, well, in your case, maintain, and in my country's case, get on a trajectory of declining average hours of work. Now, I'll tell you why in a minute, but let me just say something about the trajectory that we have been on, and also to remind us that this is important not just for ecological reasons, but also to solve the unemployment crisis that I started with. So this is a policy that I will argue has actually 3 important beneficial effects, but let's just talk about the 2 of them first. Between 1870 and 1973, so for 100 years, all of the, and I could put it, smaller industrialized, early industrializing countries, the current global north countries had experienced dramatic reductions in their average hours of work. In 1870, the average worker in these countries worked 3,000 hours a year. That's roughly a 60-hour a week work week. By 1970, in the countries where hours were lowest, which of course include Germany and the Netherlands, we were down to about something like 1,700 hours a year, so almost cut in half. The United States was a leader here, surprisingly, because now, of course, we're known as a country with very long working hours, and I'm going to show you a little bit about that. Now, I want to apologize here that the colors changed on the graph, which I only realized just now. But the bottom 2 are France and Germany, which, of course, as you know, have continued on a downward trajectory of hours. So average hours, this is data to 2007. Those bottom 2, France and Germany, are a little bit over 1,400 hours a year. If you can see that sort of orange line in the middle, that's the United States. And one of the things you see there is almost no decline in hours relative to these other countries. So very little decline in hours over this period, 1973 to the present. The US diverged from most of Europe after being actually the world leader in work time reduction until the mid-1970s. The US reduced Sunday work and Saturday work, introduced vacations and so forth, very early in relationship to other countries. But we've now gone in another direction. One last piece of information, which is just 2007, so that's post-crisis, to 2010, which is the most recent we have available. In Germany, a little bit of reduction since then, not as much as earlier. Italy is continuing on reduction, but some countries like Spain, for example, have started to go in the other direction, and there are some other European countries who have also turned around over the last 10 years or so, because there has been, as you know, a big discussion, a discourse about working hours and whether or not continuing on the trajectory of declining hours is a good thing. So this is what happened in the United States. This is a different kind of data. The data I was just showing you is from employers, from enterprises. This data is from individuals, which also includes cases where people are taking on 2 and 3 jobs. And it shows a much bigger increase in hours of work. The other big thing that happened, of course, in the United States is we had a big increase in married women going into the labor force and working many more hours when they did. So that on average, in the US, over this period from 1973 till just about until the recession, the panic of 2008, the average American put in an additional 200 hours of work per year. So working hours growing there. Now, a key dimension of this is that longer hours leads to higher ecological footprints and higher carbon footprints. Longer hours is in itself are in themselves a direct contributor to climate destabilization. There are two main effects here, and I've just put up this is just a simple 2x2 graph which looks at eco-footprint on one side and the average hours of work in a variety of countries on the other. So each of those little crosses represents a country. I've now done a much bigger research project looking at all of the OECD countries since 1960, which is when the eco-footprint starts, also looking at the carbon footprint through to the most recent data, which is 2010. And what we find is that there are two effects. One is the scale effect, which is that when working hours go up, that's associated with a larger scale of output, a larger GDP. And I'll say a little bit more about why this is on the next slide. So that's higher working hours mean people producing more, means more emissions. The other thing is that in countries where people have longer hours of work and less leisure time, they tend to shift to more ecologically intensive lifestyles. So there's what we would call an effect on the composition of what people consume. The biggest dimension of this is transport. If you are time stressed, you move in the fastest way possible, all other things being equal. So more time poverty, as we call it, or time scarcity, you want to move more quickly. So you shift from the slower forms of transport, like walking, biking, public transport, to private cars and autos. What's that? Oh, that's true. In certain places, that is true. But in general, one of the things you find in highly time-stressed societies is people go on holidays, on short airplane trips. They take weekend holidays. In the United States, for example, flying to the Caribbean or flying to Florida for the holiday became very popular, for a weekend became very popular as people got more and more time-stressed. Households which have more time poverty also tend to live in bigger houses, and they tend to buy more services which have more ecological intensity. So this is sort of how the system works. If you think of it from the trajectory of the economy, the mechanism of the scale effect is the following. I think the easiest way to think of it has to do with productivity growth. When the economy experiences productivity growth, it means that each individual worker can produce more in a given amount of time. That's how we define labor productivity growth. And that's a key feature of advanced economies, which is constant growth in productivity, particularly in some countries since the downturn, have had very high labor productivity growth. The countries which are doing more labor hoarding, like Germany, will have a little bit less. The United States has had very rapid labor productivity growth. If you take that productivity growth, you can do two things with it. One is you can produce more output, because now in any given week or month or year, a worker can produce more. So you can either increase that production, or the person can take more time off the job and you produce the same amount. So what happens if you have fixed hours of work and productivity growth is that you have increases in output and consumption. And those in turn lead to ecological impact, because the scale of production is associated, higher scale of production is associated with more ecological impact. Now, the technological change solution, which says we're going to solve climate change through technology, comes in here at the end and tries to say for any given level of output and consumption, we want to reduce the eco-impact. I call it an end-of-pipe solution because you've already had the productivity growth has already moved through the system and creating a lot more ecological pressure. Conversely, you could take that productivity growth and use it to reduce hours of work rather than put it to increasing, maximal increase in production. So you get less growth in output. You might even get zero growth in output and take it all in the form of shorter hours of work. You then have technological change coming in, and it reduces your ecological impact. So hours of work turn out to be an absolutely crucial variable for controlling eco-impact. And if you're thinking already in terms of steady-state economy or degrowth, decroissance, or moving out of what I've called the work and spend economy, or moving out of that we have to grow, grow, grow mentality, which has dominated the entire world economy since the Second World War, hours of work are absolutely central to that. I don't think you can actually achieve a solution to climate change without incorporating reductions in hours of work. Now, I'm talking here about the wealthy countries. I'm not talking about the countries of the global south, which need ecological space to grow and which are on a trajectory of rising working hours, particularly in their formal sectors. So this is about the wealthy countries of the north and the question of how they take productivity growth. Do we take it in the form of more stuff, more production, or do we take it in the form of more leisure? From the point of view of the firm, once you get the financial incentives right, in terms of there are distorting incentives that have to do with the taxes paid and so forth, and I'm happy to go into this in the question period. Once you get those financial incentives right, it shouldn't matter to many employers from the point of view of competitiveness. I mean, you can see your own country or the Netherlands as an example. These are two countries with very short working hours, very competitive on an international scale. It's the cost per unit of labor time, not the cost per person, that determines competitiveness. And that's really important. If you get all your costs flexibilized by the hour, you can reduce hours of work without eroding your competitiveness, because clearly that's one of the things that societies, employers, and societies think about a lot when they think about these work time regimes. So you want to maintain a highly competitive regime, and you can do that with shorter hours of work if your tax system is structured right and so forth. So shorter hours gives us 3 dividends. I've talked about 2 already. The first is lower unemployment and more job creation. The second is that they reduce ecological and carbon footprints. And of course, the third is what you get in exchange for not getting more output, you get more time. You get more time for yourself, more time for your family, more time for community. This is something valuable. And it also is key to creating a different kind of regime of consumption and daily life outside the workplace. And that's the issue that I want to turn to now. Because if it were merely a question of reducing working hours and people had more leisure time but didn't know what to do with it, or if they sat on the couch and watched television, you're only going to get 2 of those benefits, and it's not going to be a policy that ends up being so popular. The other way to think about it is to think about the fact that in a regime of declining hours of work, when a large part, or maybe even all productivity growth is taken as shorter hours of work, incomes will not be growing as fast, or if it's all taken as shorter hours of work, they're not going to be growing at all. You're going to have real incomes basically stabilizing. This is what the Netherlands did at the beginning of the 1980s. They went for about 20 years with stable, real wages and big increases in hours of leisure time, big declines in hours of work, shifted to much more part-time work, shorter hours, and so forth. A lot of 4-day work weeks, et cetera. So you need a strategy to cope with a society in which people's incomes are no longer growing at, roughly speaking, the rate of productivity. How are they going to meet their needs? How are they going to get consumption needs met? And how are they going to live lives that are going to give them a lot of satisfaction? And that's something that we are only now just, I think, beginning to see some answers to.